Hello and welcome to The Game Changers. I'm Sue Anstis, and this is the podcast where you'll hear from trailblazing women in sport who are knocking down barriers and challenging the status quo for women and girls everywhere. What can we learn from their journeys as we explore key issues around equality in sport and beyond? I'd like to start with a very big thank you to our partners Sport England, who support the Game Changers podcast through a National Lottery award. I'm excited to say that in this, the 18th series of The Game Changers, I'm talking to founders and entrepreneurs, the women who have set up organisations that help change the landscape for all women and girls in sport. My guest today is Mel Bound, the founder of This Woman Runs, formerly This Mum Runs, the world's largest digital and in-person running community for women, with a vision to inspire women everywhere to enjoy the life-changing benefits of being active. What started as a local women's running group in Bristol in 2014 has evolved into a powerful global movement for women everywhere. So Mel, I know your business and your home are now based in Bristol, but is that where you grew up?
I grew up in Reading, actually, Sue.
Right.
Berkshire girl as well. Yes, I was there for virtually all of my childhood, actually, and then left and went to university in Birmingham. Moved to London for work for a few years, and then landed in Bristol for love, actually, initially, but then fell in love with the city and have been here ever since.
And how was, you mentioned the Birmingham University, but how was sport a part of your younger life growing up?
So my earliest memory of sport actually is, and I talk about this story a lot because I think everyone assumes when you work in sport that you grew up always being the sporty kid. And actually, as a youngster, I was chronically asthmatic, and it was in the 70s when being asthmatic was not something that was easily managed with the inhalers and things that we have these days. So I was the weird, wheezy kid at school with allergies and, off school a lot with various things going on with my lungs. But I was actually fortunate enough to have an extremely forward-thinking GP who said to my mum, the best thing you can do for her is to get her outdoors and being active, and running would be brilliant for her. And so my mum really took that to heart. And before I knew it, I was kind of whisked off to, the athletics club and every club that she could kind of find to sign me up for. And I also had a PE teacher at my primary school who also kind of took up the challenge. And through that, I discovered I was actually quite good at running. And I went from being the slightly weird, wheezy kid to being, Mel's the girl that we want to pick first on the school relay team, or put on the last leg, for sports day. And suddenly running was something that gave me an identity from like kind of feeling slightly othered and slightly bullied. Running and being the kind of kid that was good at running, and eventually the kid that was sporty, became a really important part of my identity, and carried on through my kind of teen years and into university when I chose to study sports science as my degree as well.
How interesting, isn't it, that a doctor, as you say, in the 70s was so forward-thinking to recommend activity?
Yeah, I mean, it's the original social prescribing, isn't it? It completely changed my life, because I kind of uncovered this thing that, it's still, all these years later, gives me so much joy. It's still such a big part of my identity. All through my school years, I was the sporty kid. I just absolutely loved it and lived and breathed it. And it really, I'm not even sure it would have happened had it not been for him suggesting that in the first place.
Yeah, that's brilliant. And you mentioned you took a similar path to me, studying sports science at university, and then you worked in the fitness industry and in sports marketing. And I know you were a graduate at Holmes Place at a time when the fitness industry was really growing. So what was your experience of that like?
God, it was, Sue, it was mad because, we were the first, I was with a cohort of graduates, mostly from Birmingham, actually. And the reason for that was that our boss at the time had also been at Birmingham before us. And he'd joined Holmes Place in Chelsea and had risen through the ranks really quickly. He's a great guy, Nick. And so he had come up with this idea of recruiting graduates from the sports science degree and training them to be managers of clubs. But, we are 21-year-old graduates, suddenly find ourselves on the King's Road, in a glamorous health club. And, so it was a real kind of work hard, play hard environment. But what was amazing was that we were given so much responsibility, so quick. Like, it was real responsibility. It was on the job learning, and it was a kind of a deep learning experience in pretty much every area of the health club business. So we'd start on the gym floor as a gym instructor, and then we'd learn about gym management, and then we went on to exercise to music and learned to become a fitness exercise to music instructor, which I hated, but I did it. And then we were managing the studio timetable, and then we kind of progressed through to club management. And so there was, and it was a very accelerated process as well. It was over 18 months, a couple of years, and we were, all of us that were part of that cohort were either assistant club managers or club managers of multi-million-pound businesses. Looking back at it, it was such an amazing opportunity, completely thrown in at the deep end, but what an amazing way to learn the business. One of the things I did take from it, though, that I think in a weird way has sort of led me to the work that I do now, is that I really disagreed with some of the fundamentals of the fitness industry at the time, which was really about selling as many memberships as possible, getting people in and out the door, actually not even really caring whether people came and used the gym. You'd sell the membership, and if they didn't come, brilliant, because there was more space to sell more memberships. And often writing programs for people that you knew weren't really going to help them with their goals, because it was really about not overutilizing certain machines or getting people in and out of the gym space as quickly as you could. And I also think for women, those gym environments were not always that positive. It was very much about, it was very much about kind of body beautiful and what you look like, and image and skimpy clothes and all of that, which I know now can have such an influence on how women feel about being active. So lots and lots of learnings from that early experience at Holmes Place that I still use in the work I do today.
I say you almost had a bit of an unsettling feeling around that fitness industry. It took me much longer to get there myself. I worked in it for another 15 or so years. But is that the reason that you didn't stay in this sector? Because clearly you'd had an amazing kind of starting out in that role.
Yeah, and I was doing really well, and I was offered. I actually studied German with my degree, so I did German and sport, and I got offered the opportunity to go over to Switzerland to start a new club in Switzerland, which was amazing. I was 23 years old, but part of my kind of, I guess this was a personal goal, but I always planned to work for 2 or 3 years out of university and then go traveling. So I earned loads of commission because I was often in a sales role, and I saved all my money, and I booked a round the world ticket just before I got offered this job in Switzerland. And I remember my boss at the time saying to me, you're crazy not to take this job, and whatever you paid for your ticket, we'll give you the money back for your ticket because we really want you to take this role. But was my plan, and it was a real kind of heart and head decision. That's really what I wanted to do, and so off I went. And when I came back, I still wanted to work in sport in some way, but I didn't want to be in the fitness industry as it was then anymore.
And you went on to work in sports events in the early days of Fast Track, so Alan Pascoe's agency. Can you paint a picture of the sports industry at that point? It was 20 years ago.
Yeah, I mean, it was so competitive getting jobs in sport back then, wasn't it? There were just, there just weren't that many jobs outside of, like being a PE teacher or working in the fitness industry. So I remember seeing the advert for that job, and it was an event manager job, and I had no event management experience at all. But I really, really wanted the job because there were hundreds of people who applied for that role. I found out subsequently, and I kind of winged it a little bit. And I remember, I think it was a second interview, and I knew I was probably a bit of a dark horse because I didn't really have direct experience for the role. And I made this PowerPoint presentation that kind of showed how the skills I had from working in the health and fitness industry were transferable, and obviously managed to convince Michelle and Trish, who were interviewing me, that I'd do an okay job. But I just remember it being, from the outside, you imagine it being really glamorous, don't you? But my God, it's hard. It was hard work. And, for 6 months of the year, I was away from home. We were staying in hotels. We were traveling all the time. working incredibly long hours. But then, event day would come around, and the events we were doing were televised athletics events, and the buzz for me, the buzz of being in a stadium where you had a role in every single little detail that went into that, those spectators' experience was just incredible. It was proper pinch me moment stuff, but also incredibly hard work at the same time. But I think the kind of relationships and the friendships, I don't know if you found this back then, but the relationships and the friendships that you make in that kind of environment just last a lifetime, because you go through those experiences together. You're away from home and traveling a lot together. In your formative years, we're all in our mid-20s, and those friendships last a lifetime, I think.
I was going to mention that actually, because I think Fast Track was an organisation where many great people that are in the sports industry today sort of, paid their dues and worked there. And it was lovely to see you recently at Leaders Week, catching up with Michelle Dyte, who's now at Wimbledon, and reminiscing about your time working there together. So what do you think? Obviously, you said it's that travelling abroad and being together, but what else was it, do you think, about the culture of that organisation? Because from all I hear, it does feel like it was such a powerful organisation.
Yeah, it was. And I think at the time when I joined, I think Michelle was employee number 4 or something like that, and I was employee number 15 or something. And we were a tiny team doing massive things, even just in terms of capacity. But also, Alan Pascoe is someone, he was such a visionary, really, in terms of athletics and his vision for what it could be as a spectator sport, as an in-stadium spectator event. And I think what we tried to do as a team was really groundbreaking at the time. It was really challenging the way that people experience track and field, which historically had been, you'd go to an event and you might miss a world record because there's so much going on that you just might not be looking in the right direction. So everything that we did was about thinking about every single touch point and experience that you have as a participant in the stadium, as well as, how that conveys through the television screen, and making that as amazing as it could be, and really breaking the rules and challenging the norms of a sport that was quite traditional. And I think what Alan gave us was a lot of freedom to do that, and a lot of encouragement to push the boundaries and do things differently. And it translated into packed stadiums, and I think an era of athletics where people knew who athletes were, and they'd turn up to events because they were excited about the experience they were going to have. So I think all of us were incredibly proud of the work, and it's fed into, when I look at what everyone's out there doing now, it's definitely fed into the stuff that we're all out in the world doing now, even 20 years later.
Yeah, how fabulous for him to know the impact he's had on those people and their careers too. So what was your career path then after those early years and the kind of travelling and the events with Fast Track through to the creation of what was then This Mum Runs?
So I had a bit of a weird 10 years after Fast Track, and that's because I moved out of London, and at the time I did it really naively. I just assumed, I'll still be able to find work in sport outside of London. But at the time, that was absolutely not the case. And I moved to Bristol, and I remember looking for a job in sport, and the only job was with World Snooker. No, I don't really, no kind of disrespect to snooker, but I just didn't want to do that. Having been, working in athletics and the work we were doing at Fast Track. And so I found myself taking a bit of a kind of move into more general events. I spent the next 10 years working my way up through events, brand experience, brand marketing, agency world. With some really fantastic clients. We did work on the Manchester Commonwealth Games. We worked with Reebok. We did car launches for major brands. We worked with tech companies. Incredibly interesting stuff. And then the kind of latterly, the more my most recent role to what I do now. I was a strategy director for a brand experience agency, which meant I worked at board level with clients that were trying to work out how to spend their event budget. And I think it kind of has led into what I do now, because I am kind of at my core, I'm deeply interested in people and what makes them tick, and in creating experiences that have an impact on them in some way. And that comes from those fast track days. Definitely fed into the work I was doing in events, where it was really about kind of understanding where people were at and what a brand or organization wanted to achieve in terms of how they felt, how they behaved, what they did, or what they achieved as employees or as customers of their brand. And so I would kind of work really deeply with chief marketing officers and CEOs and boards around really challenging that and thinking about, okay, you're a tech company and everyone sees you as a tech company, but you want to be seen as an innovation brand. What do we need to do from a event and experiential perspective that's going to enable you to make that shift? And it comes down to people and experiences and the kind of experiences that you deliver. And I guess that feeds into everything that I do now. I'm still as curious about that. And, obviously now we create experiences for women, and that's in digital spaces and in real life through the runs that we deliver. For me, the curiosity is still about how do we create something with those experiences, a shift with those experiences in how people feel, in what they do and how they behave and how they interact with each other. So it all sort of makes sense, even though I kind of went off on a bit of a tangent for 10 years. Yeah.
And what then was the inspiration for this Mum Runs?
Do you know what? It was such an accident, because I think I've always had it in me to start my own business. I think I was a kid. I remember as a kid, I'd have all these little kind of hustles going on. Like I'd set up little stalls in my back garden, charge people to come along and play things that I'd created, and a little cleaning business when I was 13 or something. So I think I've always wanted and hankered after doing my own thing, but I could never have imagined it would be this. And actually, when I kind of at the very beginning, I didn't start out to set up a business. It was 10 years ago. My daughter was 4, my son was 10 months old. As anyone with young kids will say, your own time just goes out the window. Anything you might have done before you had kids in terms of being active becomes massively challenging. Definitely was for me. And added to that, I also I had an accident out running actually with my daughter, and I slipped a disc in my back, and it led to having surgery and a year of rehab, relearning how to walk, and all of that stuff that I just shared with you about my identity being around moving and running and being active just disappeared. I basically was really depressed, and I found being a new mum really challenging, and I found it quite lonely, quite isolating. I was a bit of an older mum. I'd kind of go to a lot of the groups, and I didn't feel like I had anything in common with the people I was meeting. So I was struggling, I guess, and that was the context for all of this. I had a trainer at the time who was doing my rehab, and she was actively encouraging me to start running again. And I was actively resisting it, and I resisted it for some time because I was terrified that I would injure myself again. But this one day, I just remember she'd kind of nudged me again, and I'd kind of gone, okay, I'll try and find someone else locally, another woman who doesn't have any time, that's got young kids, that's juggling a lot of stuff, that's feeling unfit and a bit nervous. And maybe I can just find a buddy to go out running with. So I put a post onto it was just like a mum's buying and selling group, sharing a bit of that. And I just said, if anyone would like to come and meet me for a run, then I'm going to go and stand outside the park on Wednesday night. So that's what I did. I almost didn't go. It was raining. It was November. It was cold. My husband was literally shoving me out the door. And thank God he did, because 75 women turned up to meet me. Total strangers, women I had never met, women that did not know each other, came out of their houses on a rainy November night to meet a total stranger to go for a run. And aside from being completely terrifying, it was just that massive light bulb moment of, wow, oh my God. And as someone that's really interested in people, you can imagine the light bulb moment for me. That was just like, wow, there are all these women that feel exactly the same way. And they've turned up. And it's not even really about the run. We went for a kind of 10-minute run down a busy main road and came back again. But we stood outside the park and we talked for a long time, just kind of chatted. And it was that real sense of connection that I think that's the thing I remember the most. And I think that's the thing that we all wanted to replicate. We wanted to do it again. We wanted to meet the next week. And that's where it all started.
And where were these women from? Were they similar to you? They were mothers. They were, what was their running experience across that group?
So they were all mums. But the interesting thing was the chat that we had was not about kids. It was about everything but. It was almost like we were all crying out just to step outside our lives for a minute and all the stuff that comes with having young children and just be us and talk about stuff that has nothing to do with our children. That was kind of the kind of really interesting thing for me. Most of them had done a bit of running before, but all of them had stopped for one reason or another. So they weren't women that were regularly running already. They were women that were kind of related to what I'd shared. What was interesting though, Sue, was and that was the origin story, but I often talk about there's another moment about it's probably about 2 months later that I talk about as the real origin story. I'd gone home, set up a Facebook group, called it This Mum Runs. I'd never run a community before. I didn't know what I was doing. But I set it up and women started joining it and more women were turning up to runs and women from other parts of Bristol were saying, oh, will you start some runs for us? I was kind of feeling really proud and like we were doing something, something really good was happening. But I remember this kind of night really clearly because I was putting my son to bed and my phone was on the stairs. I just suddenly heard all of these notifications on my phone and I thought, God, what's happened? And when I looked at my phone, a woman had posted to say that she joined the community and she'd been following and she was really enjoying seeing everyone's photos and stories of us going out running. But and this was her words about herself. She said, I'm a porky, unfit mum of two and I haven't moved off the sofa for the last 20 years. I just sit here drinking wine. And hundreds of women had replied saying, me too. That's exactly how I feel. And so all of these women had kind of been drawn to the community, but didn't feel like they could join in because they weren't currently active and had never really been active. And that was the game changer moment for me because I felt a deep empathy for those women because I'd been in the same position as them for the last kind of 2 or 3 years with my injury and as a kind of coping with new motherhood, but I'd also had the experience of the absolute joy of being active. And so I guess that was the start of my mission of how do we support women that feel like that and how do we give them the gift of the joyfulness that comes of being active and the joyfulness of the kind of friendships and the connections you make through being active. And that was the start of everything. It's the root of everything that even now, 10 years down the line, that we still do. It's really about understanding those women and how they feel and how hard it is when you've never done it, you've never had it, and taking that first step and thinking about the experience they need to have, whether it's online or whether it's turning up to an in-person run, for them to feel welcome and for them to keep coming back. And that's driven absolutely everything that we do.
And at what point did you then take that opportunity, that decision to stop either going back to corporate life or taking another job and then fully immerse yourself in that world of running This Mum Runs?
So I think I had a bit of a sliding doors moment because I was still on maternity leave at that point when we first started, but I went back to work and while I was on maternity leave, I'd been offered a promotion, but when I got back to work, it was taken away.
Oh, wow.
I think a lot of women might relate to that sort of story. And so I kind of got back to work and I just thought, why am I doing this? Because I had a job that meant a lot of traveling, meant me being away from my kids a lot of the time. And in that moment, I just felt intensely undervalued. And obviously at the same time, I'm doing this work, it's not even work at this point, but I'm building this thing that's giving me it's massively rewarding and purposeful and making a difference. So I kind of started thinking about, I really want to be doing this all the time, but I don't know how to make that transition. But I was heading up a team that was working on one client and the client pulled the account from our agency. So our entire team was put at risk of redundancy. And inside, I was thinking, brilliant. I'm saying this is perfect timing. So I went through a redundancy process, and this is the sliding doors bit. As I was going through the redundancy process, I was up one night feeding my son, and I was scrolling on my phone through Facebook as people do, and an ad came onto my feed for a program called Entrepreneurial Spark, which was a program supported by NatWest, where you had to apply. It was very Dragon's Den. You didn't necessarily have to have a kind of like a functioning business, but you just had to have an idea for a business. And I just kind of on a whim applied, one-handed, my son in one hand, and I applied on my phone. And anyway, I got made redundant, and I got a place on Entrepreneurial Spark in pretty much the same week. And so the decision was sort of taken for me, and I was suddenly immersed in this world of learning how to be an entrepreneur. Anyone that's kind of thinking about joining one of those programs, it's honestly one of the best things I ever did. It was amazing because it was all about investing in you as an entrepreneurial leader to develop an idea into a successful and sustainable business. And if I had not done that, I don't think I'd be here where I am now, because I had no idea what I was doing. I'd worked in businesses, I'd made businesses a lot of money, I'd had big roles, but I had never started a business from a blank sheet of paper and done all the things that you have to do to get a business up and running, and all the stuff that that I might hate doing, but just have to get on with. I'm not sure without that kind of support of that program and the network that I built through that program, whether I would have got through the first 2 or 3 years. It was completely game changing.
How long did it run for?
The initial program was 6 months, and we were the first cohort. So it was quite interesting because the Entrepreneurial Spark was sort of building the plane and flying the plane at the same time. And it was brilliant because we were kind of the guinea pigs, but we benefited. There was so much we gained from it. So, for example, one of the things that was in that first cohort that I think doesn't continue now, is that there was a big focus on pitching and learning how to pitch your business effectively. And there was lots of cash prizes for pitching competitions. I was rubbish at pitching, and it was massively out of my comfort zone. I made myself do it because I wanted to win the cash. And so I won loads of cash. And there was a few of us that at the end of the 6 months, we then applied, and we were able to extend for another 6 months. And we ended up staying, some of us, for 2 years. And that meant we had office space, we had weekly coaching with they were called enablers. They were kind of like business coaches, but also, more importantly, we're part of this network of other entrepreneurs that were going on the same journey at the same time, which is amazing. It was such an amazing experience. God, I was properly winging it though. I admit it now, but at the time we had to go to these enablement sessions every week. I just didn't know what I was doing. Like and I didn't have the confidence to say, I don't know what I'm doing. And so I'd go into these meetings with sort of cobbled together information. And if I had my time again, I would go in and I would be much more honest and say, I don't know how to do this.
Yeah.
And I'd ask the questions, and I'd ask for more help, instead of feeling like I had to pretend like I knew everything about everything.
Yeah. What amazing. That's a fantastic backing, isn't it, for an initiative like that, to see the impact it had. So in terms of the community, how has the community grown and evolving over that? Well, it's almost a decade, isn't it, next month? Or this month is a decade.
Yeah. Well, we obviously started with that one run, but we're now 250,000 women in 83 towns and cities, mostly in the UK. We've got a couple of communities outside of the UK, and we've got plans to expand outside the UK as well. It's been interesting because I remember hearing a talk in my early days of being an entrepreneur by the guy that set up Pret a Manger. And he shared a kind of personal anecdote of when he had one cafe, and he opened the second Pret a Manger, and his entire business almost collapsed with the expansion from 2. And that was my experience as well. So kind of when we went from one community in Bristol, I knew I wanted to create this kind of community model that we could put in any town or city in the world and have confidence that it would, be positive experience, and that it could grow and be sustainable. But it took a long time to get to the point where we had 2 communities, and then 3, 4, 5. And I'd say that kind of 1 to 2 was particularly hard, because you're kind of taking what's something that I'm personally very close to, and people know who I am, and it's very wedded to me and my presence, and then putting it somewhere where I'm not. And we have to work out how we, how we can recruit and train those local teams, and, have the right systems and processes to know that those digital communities, but also the kind of physical weekly runs, are actually going to operate well. And in a weird way, COVID helped us with that. We went into COVID with 5 communities and we came out with 50.
Wow.
Yeah, I know, which is nuts. And I think the reason for that is because we had to close down all of our in-person communities for obvious reasons. So it meant that I could just focus on expanding our digital footprint. And so over that period, we really nailed our playbook for digital communities. And then we expanded really quickly, when we came out of the worst of COVID and we could get back to being together in person. We then kind of had to work out how to do the in-person bit and make sure that was really positive. And now I can say with some confidence that, we're at Community 83. We know how to recruit the right people. We know how to train those digital community leaders, support them to launch a digital community, support them to build a local team of volunteers and launch local runs, and know that it will have the best possible chance of succeeding. Sometimes it doesn't, but we know that we've got the right conditions now for it to have the best chance of succeeding, and the experience for women in those areas to be really, really positive.
And what's your split now then in terms of digital and in person? Does each of those different 83 entities have digital and in person?
Yeah, that's the model. That's the model basically. So the digital exists to support and enable the in person, because we're really about bringing women together in person and using digital to do that. So we've been operating on Facebook, and we're in the process of moving our entire community to a new home, which is our own app. And that will mean that we can start to connect women around more than just where they live. And that's the kind of next phase of what we want to do, is to be, because meaningful connection that's kind of what we're offering. And we know that women want to connect around more than just where they live. So that might be their life stage. It might be, they've entered an event and they want to connect with other women that are training for that event, or they're interested in nutrition, or they've got an injury and they want to be in a space with other women that are, recovering from injuries or illnesses or whatever. And so the purpose of the new app is to bring all of our women, the women that are kind of part of our 83 communities, into one space. They'll still be able to connect with their local communities and find their local runs, but they'll also now be able to connect in a digital way around all those other things as well. So we're just learning about, how to do that.
And I guess all those things, and you've obviously rebranded from this mum runs to this woman runs this year as well, to all take money and investment. So where have you found that funding? What's that process been like for you over the last decade?
Oh, wow. It's
It's a loaded question.
Yeah, it's a loaded question, because as we know, it's incredibly hard as a female founder to unlock money. Less than 2% of equity funding goes into female founded businesses, about the same from philanthropic funding as well. So, there's not a lot of cash going into female founded businesses, and there's some brilliant businesses. And so you're kind of in this competitive space, which is challenging. You name it, Sue, I've done it. So the first phase for us was that we crowdfunded. And I did that. It was quite a deliberate move, because we're obviously a business that's all about community, and we're all about free programs, and we're all about volunteers. However, we need money to grow, and our mission is massive, and we want to grow a community that's global and can reach women all around the world, and that takes cash. And so I took the decision deliberately to create a company around our community, because I knew that we would need probably diversified, lots of different ways to bring money in. And so when I set up that company, I crowdfunded to sell 10% of the company to the community. And that felt really, in terms of my own personal values, that felt really important.
Yeah.
I'm giving women in our community skin in the game. I'm giving them the opportunity to financially invest in something that means something to them. And hopefully at some point we'll be able to, they'll get a return on their investment. That was the first thing we did. So
when was that? How long ago was that?
Oh my God.
Ish.
2016. something like
Right.
that. At the time, we were we crowdfunded on the Crowdcube platform, and at the time we were the fastest funded female business with the highest percentage of female investors,
Wow. Wow.
which is amazing. Yeah, I mean we were like we'd hit our target within less than 48 hours, which is amazing. Since then, we've done 2 investment rounds with angel investors, with a local angel investment network called Bristol Private Equity, who were brilliant and kind of real. I'd say they were real kind of early adopters and believers in our mission, because it's certainly with the first round, it was still fairly early days, and we were still kind of navigating our commercial model, and and we were still only in Bristol at the time as well, so the community was relatively small. So what they saw was the ambition, and my drive to achieve that ambition, I think, was probably what they invested in. And we did a second round with them as well, which is brilliant. We've had grant funding. So actually the growth that we achieved over COVID was largely due to funding we received from Sport England. And that was all invested in building out our volunteer workforce, growing our volunteer workforce, and expanding our free programs. And then the 2 other things to date have been retail. So we have a merchandise business that started because women that were running with us wanted to be able to recognise each other when they were out on runs, and so we started making some T-shirts. I was listening to Kelly's podcast yesterday, actually, when she said she ordered 4,000 pairs of pants. It was a similar story. I had a garage full of T-shirts, thinking, God, I hope someone buys these T-shirts. I don't know what's going to happen. But I couldn't produce them fast enough. It was a surprise how quickly it grew. And actually, it was one of the ways that we grew as a brand, and we started to reach women. Like, we shipped our T-shirts. At one point, we were shipping to 30, 40 countries around the world.
Wow.
So women were coming into the brand and into the community through our merch, which was amazing. And then partnerships for us have been really important as well. So we've just entered into a second 3-year partnership with Vitality, who've been massive champions. Yeah, they've been amazing. Obviously they invest incredible amounts of money into women's sport, and have been incredibly supportive to us as, the community arm of that. And we fit really neatly in with what they're doing with Parkrun, and what they're doing with the Vitality 10K, and with what they're doing with women more widely. So that overall we've got this kind of 6-year partnership with them, which is amazing. And that's a big focus for us to grow, actually. So we're kind of currently actively talking to some really cool partners that we're going to bring on board for the next phase of our journey, which we hope will unlock the kind of big commercial engine for us, which we think is going to be around coaching and coach education. But that's the kind of watch this space, and news coming soon on that.
Excellent. And is that whole is quite a disparate, some partnerships, some merch, some different areas and pots. Is that a choice? Looking back, is that the right decision to have that variety of investment? Or actually, would you be much happier if you had somebody come along and said, here you go, Mel, £1 million, off you go?
I would have been much happier, Sue. I would be much happier. It's been really challenging, because I think with each revenue stream, whether it's been through retail or grant funding or partnership funding, what it's given us is a cash runway of a year, maybe 2 years if we're lucky. And so you get the money, and then you're sprinting as hard as you can to grow before you have to then start the whole process again of reapplying or kind of securing that ongoing funding, or thinking about marketing if it's your own revenue streams. And that's incredibly challenging. I think it's like Baz was saying, I think when in her interview a few days ago, when you're doing something that's really pioneering, like the Well HQ are doing, and like we're doing, where you're effectively creating a new category, a different way of doing things, that kind of magic wand of someone giving you £1 million or 3 million quid or whatever it is you need to do to really kind of light the touch paper is very challenging. It certainly was 10 years ago. Maybe things are starting to change a little bit. Fingers crossed. The landscape is very different now, but you have to hustle. So it does mean that this kind of slightly diversified, slightly inefficient model of revenue coming from lots of different places and different, lots of different relationships that you have to manage, and that constant eye to cash flow. And you know what it's like of right, okay, where's our runway? What can we invest in? Can I add to the team? Can I invest in marketing? Okay, bring that partnership on board. Now I can do that. It's a little bit like that. And that's incredibly challenging.
And I think also it is that whole, you've got to invest the time. It's the time you've got to spend finding that money that you could be focusing on the business and growing and doing good. But actually it's those meetings and partnerships and then reporting, etc. too, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. I think so. So where we're trying to get to, the absolute holy grail for me is to not need money from anyone, that we're completely self-sustainable and that we're generating enough of our own revenue that we can, grow and be self-sustaining. But also we've got investors that we can start to, think about returning, giving them their return on investment as well. We're not far off being at that point. The things that we've done over the last couple of years with the new brand, with the move to the new platform, the way that we're now operating our retail business with some bigger partnerships that we're bringing on board that give us longer, we're nearly at the point where we can really invest the time and energy and resource into the commercial model that we think is going to give us that long-term growth and sustainability. But God, look how long it's taken us. There's no overnight success, unfortunately.
I said many of the women I've spoken to for the series find great support in working with co-founders, but you've been a kind of solo entrepreneur and CEO from the start. So was that a conscious decision for you?
I don't think it was conscious, and then it was just too late to change it. I think about that a lot because it is lonely and not having anyone to bounce ideas off or null through problems. But what I do have is an amazing board.
Yeah.
And so in Jenny, Ruth and Nikki, who are kind of my core board members, they act almost like co-founders. Obviously they're responsible for governance and they do all the board stuff. But the relationship I have with them is very co-foundery in that we talk through problems, and if there's a big decision I'm trying to make, I'll discuss it with them outside of board meetings. And so I have got that support around me, even though it's not in a kind of day-to-day co-founder sitting alongside me, I guess.
And as you look back now, are there decisions that you would have made differently, either in that structure and setup, or any gems of advice that you'd share for other female entrepreneurs that are kind of starting out in this space today?
I don't think I can regret anything, because any decision I've made along the way, I've made the best decision I can with the information I've got available, with the right level of balance of thinking about it and gut instinct. And I don't think you can regret that. One bit of advice I would give actually is that on the very rare occasions when I've acted against my gut instinct, I have always regretted it.
Right, yeah.
So when I'm asked about advice, I will often say, trust your instincts, listen to them and trust them, because they are usually right. It's actually quite hard to do that when you're starting out, because you kind of think, well, I don't really know what I'm doing, and therefore I'm going to take all of this advice and listen to all these people's opinions, and I'm going to ignore what I actually think because I have less experience than everyone else around me. But actually, really what it is that you need to do, I think.
How important has it been for you to see other women having success in this space? I mean, you said there's so few women that are getting that investment, but have you had role models and women that have inspired you to feel you can do it too in this space?
My role models are, God, that's such a good question. I think it has felt quite a lonely space, if I'm honest.
Yeah.
And it's interesting. I hadn't really thought about that until very recently. And I was at the Google event, Raise. And I think it's one of the first events I've been to where there were women from all around the sports sector, whether that was broadcasting or brands or governing bodies, and actually a few founders as well. And it was the first time I'd really thought, wow, there's just not many of us. And that would be one of the things, actually, just thinking about, if anyone's listening, thinking, how can we help female founders? And that visibility thing is so important. If you're someone that's putting on an event and are looking for speakers, have a think about female founders and entrepreneurs, and creating some content around women that are out there doing the sort of thing that Baz and I and Kelly and others are trying to do, because you can't be what you can't see. And so, and there might be, opportunities to connect and network that, us working in these kind of fairly lonely spaces just don't realise are there. So, God, role models. Sorry, I kind of danced around that question, didn't I? The reality is, I think in sport, like true founders, there just aren't many.
Yeah.
There just aren't many. And those of us that are in the space are trailblazing. Like we're pioneering, we're trying to, and we're kind of head down building, like thinking, dealing with problems, pivoting, hustling, doing all the things. And so it's sometimes hard to look up and look around and think, okay, how can I connect with the other women who are also doing this? It's one of the goals I've set myself this year, actually, with, just to get out and about a bit more.
Yeah.
I want to connect with other women doing this stuff. And, I think we can take a lot of strength in doing that and sharing the challenges and celebrating each other and lifting each other up, the way that women always do so brilliantly.
So in terms of the work you're doing today, what do you think are the key barriers for women coming out and running, whether either coming back to running or even getting started in running in the first place?
Well, do you know what? I think the first thing to say is there are millions of women that are in that boat. So England Athletics did this piece of research last year, and they found that this is just in England, that there are around 6.5 million women that are either lapsed runners or they're kind of running very infrequently. 6.5 million. And 70% of those women would like to run, but they don't feel like the kind of experience of running is quite right for them where they're at. I think when I try to unpick that as someone that's interested in like how people behave and how to change it, the conclusion I came to is that the DNA, if you think about the DNA of running, it's all about performance and how fast and leaderboards, and even park run, it's about a time over a distance. And all of those things are such a massive barrier to women who are not currently running, because they feel like they're going to be too slow. They feel like they're not going to fit in. They don't know what to wear. They feel like they're going to be laughed. It's all of those kind of fear of judgment things that tap into it. Or they don't know where to start, or they don't know what trainers to buy, or they don't know what sports bras to wear. It's all those kind of I don't knows. And so I guess in really simple terms, what we try to do with all of the experiences we create, whether it's in digital spaces or at our runs or in coaching programs, is design experiences from the perspective with a female lens. So thinking about everything from if you turn up to a run, people saying hello to you and actually welcoming you and recognizing that you're new and connecting you with someone that you've maybe never met before and explaining what's going to happen. None of our runs or our coaching programs are based on pace or distance. They're all based on the number of minutes moving, whether it's 30 minutes or 45 minutes or 60 minutes, which sounds ridiculously simple, but just that small change completely democratizes running, because we can say with some confidence, if you turn up and you run with us, we're going to run for 30 minutes. It doesn't matter how fast you're going, because our volunteers will manage, very differing kind of abilities and paces. We'll keep you all together. You'll all get what you want from it, and you'll all achieve 30 minutes. We can say that with absolute confidence. Once you kind of understand what the blocker is, for me anyway, it's really easy to then design experiences that start peeling those away. And sometimes it's really simple things like how women are welcomed, and that comes down to how we train our volunteers, so that our volunteers understand how women might feel when they turn up and they do the right things to make sure they feel welcome. It's how we, structure those run programs and those coach programs so that they don't feel so performance-y, like they're going to fail, and everyone's set up to succeed at whatever level they're at. And then the community bit is really important, because as you know, in the work that you do, Sue, if you create this community environment where the members are supporting each other and there's those incredible connections where someone says, oh, I haven't done any running before, I don't know where to start. And for me, as the owner of the community, I don't even need to say anything, because I know that other members of the community will leap in and they'll say, I felt like that. This is what I did. Have you tried this program? Or you could come along to this run, or I'll come and meet you and we'll go for coffee afterwards. And all of that magic that happens within a community space, when you combine those things, you suddenly help women start to, the kind of barriers that they feel start to fall away. They feel brave enough to give it a go. And then once they step in and give it a try, they're nurtured by the community to keep going. And before they know it, it's become something that's just a regular part of their life.
I love that kind of lack of competitive nature. I feel this generally across a lot of sport, that we've almost moved away from where sport was originally, of community and fun. And the things you said at the very beginning, giving women the joy, the gift, the community, that element of it, that we're so much on either with girls a pathway to, the England pathway and where you're going to get to performance wise, or for women entering competitions and times and distances, and actually where did the fun of movement and moving your body and being with friends go?
Well, and it's interesting actually, because this is one of the drivers for our rebrand was so we moved from mums to women, but one of the reasons we wanted to do that is because we wanted to be able to go downstream and start working with girls as well.
Yeah,
because I felt kind of personally quite frustrated that we'd be working with women who are in their 40s maybe, that would turn up to a session and say, oh, I've literally done nothing since PE. And so I kind of look at that and think, well, okay, so how do we stop that happening so that we can work with teenage girls, which we know is a massive drop-off point, and instill this sense of joy and friendship and connection and community so that it just becomes part of their life all the way through their life. We don't have these kind of decades of inactivity. And we did a piece of work with Bedford University, went into some school in Bedford and ran some workshops with year 7 and year 8 girls. So they would have been 12 and 13. And we talked to them about their lives, and we talked to them about, being physically active, about school PE, about the things that they do to be active, things that get in the way. And also we talked to them a little bit about walk-run programs and what they want to get from them. And the deeply depressing thing that came out of it for me was that girls are overwhelmed and stressed with all the things in their life, with school, with caring responsibilities, with cultural responsibilities, social media, and all of the stuff they have going on. They feel absolutely overwhelmed in the same way we do as women juggling a million things, but they're 12 and 13. And so what they desperately want is headspace. So when they're being offered, come and play competitive netball after school, and you may or may not be picked, and you have to come to training every week, and it's going to be about who performs best, that is an absolute no. What they want is permission to take some time for themselves, and yes, move, but in a very low-pressured, non-competitive, non-performance way, in exactly the way that women in their 40s want.
Yeah. And it's almost like I've started doing more of walking netball, but the walking netball is just rock up once a week, have a laugh. Some of them go to tournaments. I don't do the tournament bit. I just want to enjoy it and play and be with other people. And it's almost like bringing that to a younger age group to have those same sensations of overcoming loneliness, feeling a part of something, having fun and moving, isn't it?
Yeah. Watch this space on that, Sue, because we, I guess it's not core to what we do, but it's a very personal mission for me. Is how can we take the programs and the things that we've created for women, how can we take those and make them relevant to and available to teenage girls? That's something I kind of very much want us to do in the future.
And I know that safety for women out running on the streets, especially the times have changed now, it's getting darker, isn't it, too? So that safety against sexual harassment when women are out running is a huge issue. You co-founded the We Will campaign that aims to end the sexual harassment of women runners. So tell us a little bit more about that, and I guess in the impact that it is having.
Yeah, I guess the campaign came off the back of some insight that Women's Running magazine did, which found that 68% of women had been harassed while out running. I mean, that is just absolutely horrendous, isn't it? And I've certainly experienced it myself, and I know many of the women in our community have, not just name calling or cat calling, but have been physically assaulted as well out running. And it's another barrier in the way of women actually getting out the door. I know. That when the clocks go back and it's dark in the evenings, all of a sudden, we see a lot more women turning up to our group runs at this time of year because women are not able or don't feel able to go out and do those sessions on their own, and they want the safety of being in a group. And it's something that I feel quite strongly about, and it's kind of one of those perennial topics, isn't it, that comes up, and we talk about women's safety or something, so there'll be something major in the news and there'll be some media interest. But what we wanted to do with the We Will campaign was try to basically get some ownership at a very individual level for men and women to change or pledge a change, in even if it's at quite a micro level. So the campaign was around this idea of asking individuals to make a personal commitment to do one thing that might kind of ladder up to creating some change. That pledge might be, I'll call out, if I see someone catcalling, I'll call it out. If one of my mates says something and it's sexist, I will call it out. I'll have a conversation with my son about the correct way to interact around women. And there were a million things that people pledged. It was really quite a powerful campaign that, unfortunately we didn't have the budget to turn into. It's one of those, it had the power to be a very, very powerful campaign for change. We just didn't have the budget to do it. But the intention behind it was to kind of move beyond the blaming men, the not all men brigade, and the not all men brigade responding, to a collective responsibility and saying these are the things that we will do individually to try and change things. But understanding that this is such a deep rooted issue, starting with young boys in primary school, the ways that they talk to girls in the playground, all the way through to a white van man driving down the street thinking it's okay to shout things out the window at a woman running down the street. There are layers and layers and layers here that kind of make change quite difficult.
And I guess just in closing, we obviously talked about all that you do. I haven't even mentioned you're raising a family as well too. The work that you do. You sit on a number of boards as non-executive. You work with Sport England and others. Anyway, you do so much. So where do you find time for yourself? And are you still running? Where is your happy place to refresh away from it all?
So I am still running. God, wouldn't it be weird if I said, no, I'm not? I've got no time to go out running. Running is my kind of happy place still. Interestingly, so two things. I've got two young children. So when I started the business, my kids were 4 and 10 months old, which actually with hindsight was absolutely bonkers. But also over these 10 years, I've gone through the menopause. And so it's the kind of the double whammy of juggling life as a mum and trying to run a business with, that major life change and everything that comes with, losing, vital hormones in your body. So all of that has been going on, and that has definitely been challenging at times. And that's why for me, kind of maintaining that space to go out for a run is more important than ever. And it's my one non-negotiable. Like, it's 3 or 4 times a week I will be out and I'll feel a million times lighter when I return. I've also found as I've got older, I've basically got slower, which was quite hard to come to terms with. And so I found myself entering longer and longer and longer events, which I always swore I would never do. So I've just entered an event, a 50-mile ultra.
Wow.
Which I will confess I thought was 50k when I entered. It's 50 miles. But I think the thing is, I don't care about how long it takes me. I genuinely do not care. I'm non-competitive. For me, it's about just going out, getting to the start line, not being injured, getting to the start line feeling strong, enjoying it, hopefully doing it with a friend. I'm a social runner. I like running with other people, and it's the thing that keeps me sane.
If you'd like to hear from more trailblazing women in sport like Mel, there are over 200 episodes of The Game Changers that are all free to listen to on all podcast platforms or from our website at fearlesswomen.co.uk. Along with incredible entrepreneurs like Mel, my other guests have included elite athletes, coaches, broadcasters, scientists, journalists and CEOs, all women who are changing the game in sport. As well as listening to all the podcasts on the website, you can also find out more about the Women's Sport Collective, a free, inclusive community for all women working in sport. We now have over 8,500 members across the world, so please do come and join us. The whole of my book, Game On, The Unstoppable Rise of Women's Sport, is also free to listen to on the podcast. Every episode of Series 13 is me reading a chapter of the book. Thank you once again to Sport England for backing the Game Changers and the Women's Sport Collective through a National Lottery Award, and also thanks to Sam Walker, who does such a fantastic job as our executive producer. Thank you to my lovely colleague at Fearless Women, Kate Hannon. You can find the Game Changers on all podcast platforms, so please do follow us now and ensure you won't miss out on future episodes. Come and say hello on social media, where you'll find me on LinkedIn and Instagram at Sue Anstis. The Game Changers, fearless women in sport.